Breaking news just now on the central economic policy of this Trump administration. In a huge blow to the White House and its agenda, and a big win, I would say, for everyone else, a federal appeals court has just ruled that Trump's sprawling tariffs are unlawful and invalid. Of course, the president has been obsessed with imposing his willy-nilly tariffs on Americans. In fact, it has been the central plank of his entire economic agenda.
Señores, traemos las noticias de última hora. Un tribunal federal acaba de asestar un golpe durísimo contra Donald Trump. Los famosos aranceles recíprocos contra todo el mundo acaban de ser declarados ilegales por la Corte de Apelaciones de Estados Unidos, con una decisión de 7-4. Este fallo, emitido por un panel en pleno, es decir, con todos los jueces participando, nos ha dejado en claro que lo que Trump hizo a través de 5 órdenes ejecutivas, imponiendo aranceles prácticamente a todos los países del mundo, es algo inconstitucional y no está amparado por la ley que él invocaba. La sentencia, clarísima. Donald Trump abusó de su poder y se arrogó a una autoridad que la Constitución le reserva al Congreso de los Estados Unidos. Recordemos algo, Donald Trump declaró una supuesta emergencia nacional contra todos los países del mundo y utilizó eso como la excusa para poder imponer tarifas generalizadas. Argumentó que la palabra regular dentro de la ley le daba esta facultad de poder imponer estos aranceles. Pues bueno, justamente con eso el tribunal fue categórico. Si el Congreso hubiera querido darle al presidente el poder de imponer aranceles, pues bueno, habría usado la palabra arancel o impuestos, no regular. Los jueces dejaron claro que el poder que establece tarifas es del Congreso, no de un presidente autoritario que quiere gobernar por decreto.
Frame the argument that you made and what the court said about those arguments.
Yeah, so I want to begin, Chris, by saying, like you started by saying it's a blow to the President Trump. The way I really think of it is it's a win for the Constitution. And it's always, a very serious, sober thing when you challenge presidential action, and something you have to do really carefully. But when we looked at this, and I'm privileged to represent a number of small businesses, we looked at it and said, look, this just is way beyond the constitutional pale. And that's what the 7 judges today said on our nation's second highest court. They looked at it and said, the president under our Constitution is given no power to impose tariffs. Our founders expressly gave that to the Congress in Article 1, Section 8. And President Trump himself recognized that last time when he was president. He went and asked Congress for the authority to tariff, and they said no. So President Trump this time around just did it on his own. And what we said is you can't do that under the laws and Constitution of the United States. And that's what I'm glad to see the court reaffirm today.
Pues bueno amigos, en más de 129 páginas la Corte explicó por qué es que Trump violó la ley. Para empezar, los aranceles son considerados un impuesto y la Constitución entrega ese poder exclusivamente al Congreso de los Estados Unidos. Pues bueno, la AP permite al presidente tomar medidas económicas solo en casos de emergencia, pero nunca le otorga potestad de imponer tarifas globales, que fue lo que Trump hizo. Cada vez que el Congreso, y eso, ¿no? Si es que se ha delegado esa autoridad en otras leyes, siempre lo hicieron con términos claros y límites estrictos, montos, plazos y condiciones específicas. Y bueno, pues nada de eso ocurrió aquí. En palabras simples, Donald Trump quiso inventar poderes que no existen.
I thought this is an interesting phrasing. This is the federal circuit, which is an interesting and unique appellate circuit that deals with certain jurisdictions, including international trade. They talk about the 5 executive orders that impose tariffs of, and they say, unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world. Which I thought was, when you put it like that, you think to yourself, yeah, that does seem like a pretty broad claim of executive authority.
Yeah, as broad as it could get. And I think this is one thing that the judges were concerned about, and certainly we've been thinking about, which is the Trump administration is saying they want to bring this case to the Supreme Court. And this US Supreme Court for many years has been saying, in particular with respect to a lot of different President Biden's initiatives, these questions are too major for the president alone to decide. They have to be done by the Congress. And here you got something as major as it gets. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says that these tariffs are the largest tax increase on Americans since Bill Clinton in 1993. And yet Congress had nothing to do with them. It's just President Trump and the stroke of his pen. And that just can't be the right way to run a constitutional system.
You know, it's been interesting to cover this as we have, because so much is focused on the concrete effects. I mean, right now, if you're buying coffee, for instance, you notice that coffee's gotten very expensive. We don't grow a lot of coffee in the U.S. There's a little bit in Hawaii, but we import a huge amount of coffee. That coffee is being tariffed. So there's all sorts of effects, but the discourse didn't really talk about the legal foundation. The argument that they're making is that there's a 1974 act that allows them to declare an emergency under which they can impose these tariffs. But what's interesting about that act is it doesn't use the word tariff at all. It's entirely about sanctions on essentially countries that we have some geopolitical adversarial relationship with, right?
You're exactly right, Chris. You're doing excellent lawyering. I suspect it's in part due to your spouse, who's an amazing lawyer in her own right. But that's exactly right. The government is saying, in this case, the Trump administration is saying that in 1977, Congress passed a law that gave the president emergency economic powers. And the court today said, yeah, that's true. There's only one problem with that. That 1977 law says nothing whatsoever about tariffs. No president in the 50 years since that law was passed thought it had to do with tariffs. And as I said a moment ago, even Donald Trump didn't think it had to do with tariffs, because the first time around when he was president, he went to Congress to try and get the tariff authority that he's now asserting. And Congress said no. And I suspect, he's worried Congress would say no if he asks again, for all the reasons that you were explaining earlier.
One of the things here, and I want to read again from this decision here, that this is the sort of core of the holding. For the reasons discussed above, we discern no clear congressional authorization by IEEPA, that's the 1977 law, for tariffs of the magnitude of the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking tariffs. Reading the phrase regulate importation, which is the statutory language they're citing, to include imposing these tariffs is a wafer-thin reed on which to rest such sweeping power. How confident were you about winning this case? I mean, you obviously had the lower court on your side, but also courts have been fairly deferential to presidential declarations of emergency powers.
Yeah, no, when you're challenging presidential action, if you're the president facing these challenges, you almost have to try to lose the case. It's like failing kindergarten. You got to try. But I think that's unfortunately where we were here. And that's why, I'm privileged not just to represent this myself, but with a whole group of very conservative folks. The Liberty Justice Center is the entity behind.
Ahora bien, los jueces también resaltaron lo desastroso que es esta medida. Donald Trump pretendía modificar unilateralmente tarifas sobre más de 4 billones de dólares en importaciones anuales. Esto prácticamente equivale al 14% de la economía estadounidense. O sea que se trata de un golpe con enormes implicaciones económicas y políticas, y todo basado en una interpretación forzada de la ley. El fallo establece que estos aranceles son ilegales, pero seguirán vigentes hasta el 14 de octubre, plazo en el cual yo creo y estimo que Trump seguramente va a querer pedir al Supremo que intervenga. Si lo hace, todo va a quedar en pausa hasta que el Supremo decida si se acepta el caso o se rechaza. Sin embargo, lo central es que ya quedó escrito. Una corte de apelaciones confirmó que Trump rompió la Constitución al imponer unilateralmente estas tarifas, estos aranceles globales. Este fallo, señores, no solo es un golpe a la política económica trumpista y fallida, sino que es un recordatorio de que los presidentes no están por encima de la ley. La Constitución nos dejó muy claro que el poder de gravar, de imponer impuestos y de tarifas les pertenece al Congreso. Simple, no a un presidente con delirios de dictador. Donald Trump intentó convertir esta emergencia inexistente en un cheque en blanco para su agenda autoritaria. Y hoy una corte federal le dijo no. Amigo, eso es ilegal. Vamos a estar siguiendo, señores, este caso de cerca, mientras se va acercando esta fecha límite, ¿no? 14 de octubre, y posiblemente una apelación al Supremo, porque eso es lo que Trump siempre hace. Pero bueno, es muy fácil, ¿no? Sacar de las casillas a Trump últimamente, ¿no? Y es que vivir gratis en su cabeza, marcarlo al punto de hacerlo perder el control. Eso yo creo que lo logran unos pocos. Gavin Newsom, la congresista Jasmine Crockett también, y por supuesto, como no, el expresidente Barack Obama. Justamente Obama acaba de darle a Trump una de las humillaciones más duras en las últimas semanas. Y la reacción de Trump no se hizo esperar. Un nuevo ataque de furia en Truth Social. Pues bueno, antes de que entremos en detalle con la respuesta de Obama, empecemos con algo clave. Lo que ya venían señalando gobernadores demócratas como Sir J.B. Pritzker.
President, and let's talk about the press secretary for the president, doesn't seem to understand that it's actually Republican states that have the crime problem. That of the 20 states that have the biggest crime problem, 13 of them are red states controlled by Republican governors. Why is he choosing? In fact, of those 20 states, we're at the bottom. Why is he choosing that over going after a red state, that voted for him, rather than a blue state that didn't vote for him? We understand why. He is a partisan. He's somebody who believes in attacking people who didn't vote for him. You know, when you're president of the United States, just like when you're governor of the state of Illinois, you represent all the people after the election. Your job is to deliver for Republicans and Democrats alike. That's not what this president has done. Instead, he's attacking Democrats. He's attacking Democratic states. We're going to do our best to push back. I think I've been doing that loudly. Other Democratic governors and senators have been doing so. But I'm proud of this state. This president does not understand that we actually have a declining crime rate. In the city of Chicago, it's gone down. For example, the homicide rate in the city of Chicago over the last 4 years down 50%. I mean, that's more than most of the big cities in Republican-led states.
Todo lo que hace esta administración trumpista es un espectáculo. Cada despliegue de tropas, cada operación de ICE en las calles, cada ataque contra comunidades enteras. Sí, dañino y peligroso, pero sobre todo, un show para la cámara. Lo mismo está pasando en Texas, con los intentos de privar el voto a miles de personas. Y Gavin Newsom lo explicó con claridad. Esto no es solo un truco electoral, es el plan de Trump para perpetuarse en el poder.
You're not saying you think Republicans are going to stop it.
I don't think Donald Trump wants another election. You think for a second I have 24 Trump 2028 hats. His folks keep sending me.
And you think he's going to run again?
Don't give me. Who spends $200 million on a ballroom at their home and then leaves the house? So this is serious, guys. This is serious.
So it'll be Newsom Trump in 28.
No. This guy doesn't believe in free, fair elections. He tried to wreck this country. Were you there, January 6th? I think Fox was. At least they were in a lawsuit. They seem to have lost any memory of that. Shareholders didn't. I mean, he tried to light democracy on fire. He dialed for 11, almost 12,000 votes. Now he's doing it in plain sight. And people say, oh, just Trump being Trump.
En medio de todo eso, Barack Obama decidió dar un paso al frente. Ya no se quedó callado, como al inicio del trumpismo. Ahora está enfrentando directamente a su sucesor. Obama lanzó una advertencia escalofriante sobre cómo Trump ha militarizado las fuerzas locales y estatales, poniendo en riesgo los derechos básicos, como el debido proceso y las libertades civiles. Y bueno, lo dijo así.
Hey everybody, it's Barack, and I am here with my good friend, Attorney General Eric Holder, because we're facing an existential threat to our democracy, and we need your help.
Right now, in states across the country, like Texas and Florida, these extreme conservative politicians are announcing and acting on plans to slice and dice House districts with the goal of preserving their own power while diluting the voting power of communities of color.
They're doing the same thing in Ohio, trying to give one-party control over almost 90% of congressional seats.
Rather than facing their voters at the polls next year, they're trying to silence them instead.
Eric and I started the NDRC to win fights like this. So, if you want your voice to be heard in next year's midterm elections and beyond, help us meet this moment and preserve our democracy.
Y bueno, ¿cuál fue la respuesta de Trump? Un berrinche digital. A las 3 de la mañana escribió que en Washington, D.C., los carjackings habían bajado 87% y que pronto la ciudad estaría libre del crimen, excepto por Obama. Un delirio total. Lo curioso es que Trump ahora presume, ¿no?, de estas estadísticas del mismo FBI, del mismo Departamento de Justicia, a los que hace unas semanas acusaba de inventar números. Entonces, cuando le conviene son verdad, cuando no son fake news. Así de simple y de patético. Pero, bueno, esto no se trata de cifras. Lo que estamos viendo es un claro intento autoritario de controlar instituciones. Los tanques en Union Station, las redadas en barrios de inmigrantes, las amenazas a opositores políticos. Donald Trump quiere parecer fuerte, pero amigos, sabemos la realidad, es débil, se esconde tras mentiras fácilmente desmontables. Y Jen Psaki lo dejó clarísimo en este análisis.
So the White House decided to hold a press briefing today. What a day to hold a briefing. One where, believe it or not, I came up personally. And I will definitely get to that, I promise. But I'll start with a couple of others. So let's start with Brandon Tatum, who is a YouTuber.
I want to ask the question of, we know that it's not a gun thing. Any rational person knows it's not a gun thing. We know it's a mental health issue. So I want to know from you, what is President Trump and the White House going to do to address mental health issues around the country associated with these shootings?
Well, first off, Brandon, feels like someone in the White House may have written that question for you, but it is definitely a gun thing. And any rational person knows that, because mental health issues are not a unique issue to the United States. But guess what is? Gun violence. We have more guns per capita than any other developed country, and also a higher rate of gun violence than any other developed country. So yeah, Brandon, it's the guns. And for what the administration will do to address mental health issues around the country, which I certainly hope they do more. I mean, right now they are talking about targeting SSRI medication, which people use to combat depression. It's a little bit of a bizarre strategy, Brandon. Now, if we actually want to talk about mental health issues, which I agree is a major issue, we could talk about expanding mental health access or putting money toward community outreach programs. Or we could talk about how to combat online radicalization, as it appears like this shooter, like others, was influenced by a fringe extremist and nihilistic online culture. I think we both know they actually have no intention of doing any of those things. All right, Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, go ahead.
On the firing of the CDC director, first, who will replace her? And then also, overnight, the White House said that she did not align with the president's agenda. Dr. Menard's attorneys say that she refused to rubber stamp unscientific, reckless directives and fire dedicated health experts. What specifically did she do wrong?
Well, Gabe, what she did was actually very right, which was to listen to the science and the data and the experts and not the conspiratorial recommendations of RFK Jr. when she made her COVID vaccine recommendations. So putting expertise over ideology is what RFK Jr. thinks she did wrong. The White House even said it out loud in their statement when they said she, quote, wasn't aligned with the president's mission to make America healthy again. I'm sure about that. As for who will replace her, well, the White House has tapped RFK Jr.'s deputy, Jim O'Neill, as the new acting CDC director. And one HHS official told us that O'Neill will, quote, do anything Secretary Kennedy and Stephanie Speer will tell him to do. And that quote pretty much tells you all you need to know about that guy. Okay, one more. Reagan Reese, Daily Caller. Why not?
Democrats, including former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, attacked prayer and pushed gun control in the aftermath of yesterday's shooting. What's the White House's response to their comments?
Well, it's quite a phrasing of your question there. But here's the thing. Prayer is a powerful source of comfort for so many people around the world during difficult times, including me. I completely feel that way. And what I said yesterday, and will say again now, though, is that prayer alone is not enough to prevent and end the crisis of gun violence in America. It's not. Here are some stats for use by anyone in the briefing room, whether you're at the podium or in the room. We live in a country where there are more guns than people. There have been 5 school shootings since the start of the school year, on August 1st, less than a month ago, and 57 school shootings since January. And the fact that parents like me have to worry every day about whether or not our kids are safe at school is what we should be talking about. So the issue I raised yesterday, and I will raise again today, and I will not stop raising, is that people in power, like, say, people in the White House, who are using their platforms to do anything other than call for action for sensible gun safety measures, they're doing anything else, like attacking me, which is a waste of time. They're doing anything but saying what should be done to help prevent tragedies like the shooting in Minneapolis. And because they're not doing that, frankly, they're not doing enough. And people shouldn't accept they're doing enough. So instead of focusing on the bad faith back and forth, I hope the question someone asks in the next briefing, anyone in the room, is why the Trump administration doesn't support universal background checks for gun sales when more than 80% of the country supports them. Why the Trump administration doesn't support making it harder for people with mental illnesses to purchase a gun, despite more than 80% of the country supporting that. And why the Trump administration doesn't support a ban on assault weapons when the majority of the country does. Look, to solve this long epidemic of violence requires action. And when kids in pews who are praying are shot, to quote the statement from Sisters of Mercy on the Minnesota Catholic school shooting, our response can no longer be thoughts and prayers alone. Even Pope Leo, then a cardinal, I will note, retweeted Senator Chris Murphy in 2017, saying your cowardice to act cannot be whitewashed by thoughts and prayers. I would retweet that too.
Donald Trump no es un líder fuerte. No ha bajado el costo de los medicamentos, no ha frenado la violencia armada, no ha hecho nada por la gente trabajadora. Su supuesto poder solo se ha usado para protegerse a sí mismo, a los millonarios que lo estaban financiando, y cómo no, también para encubrir su relación con Epstein. Señores, esa no es la fuerza de un presidente, es la debilidad de un dictador frustrado. Y si algo nos está quedando claro, es que cada vez más figuras como ser Obama, Newsom, Jen Psaki, J.B. Pritzker están exponiendo su debilidad. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, déjame tu like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete a nuestro canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.